Welcome to this week's episode of Whiskey Neat. Spirited conversations with interesting people. I am your host, Kristopher Hart. Now, let's have a talk about some things before we begin. I'll give you a guess by the title of this video and, of course, what's sitting in front of me, who's going to be on the show today. But before we begin, I want to talk about last week's episode, Mr. Dolph Goddamn Lundgren. Dolph Lundgren was an incredible opportunity. I had a great discussion, and I don't think his people will see this. I just want to say that it was an incredible honor. I found it entertaining, and it's not quite done editing, so I haven't seen it yet. I don't know if it's any good. I hope it is. It was just amazing. I really want to thank all of our sponsors, as well as Jack Brain, my producer, who dropped everything he was doing to drive out to San Antonio to sleep on a cot to make it happen. And it was dope. It was so dope, right? It was so dope. So, again, I'll say, as I say every week, the last few weeks, please rate and review the show. Go to iTunes, give your feedback, give us 5 stars. Let us know what's going on. This week's episode, I sit down with Harlen Wheatley, master distiller of Buffalo Trace, and I ask him everything that's been talked about for the past 5 years about Buffalo Trace. We talk about Pappy, we talk about barrel programs, we talk about Blantons, right? So for years, the rumor has been, or everyone's wide understanding has been, that Buffalo Trace was not allowed to actually sell anything other than regular Blantons in the U.S. Spoiler alert, that's not true. They can, they just don't. And there's a very simple and logical reason for it. We get into that. We get into his new vodka. His new vodka, even though being distilled 10 times, still carries quite a bit of flavor. I enjoyed it, and I hate vodka, so that hopefully says something. They're not sponsors of the show. They didn't pay anything to be here. I don't want to be called a marketing shill for something as straightforward as this episode could be. Tyler Fraser is a state manager for Texas. He is responsible for whether or not you, if you're a store owner or a private club, the guy that's on the show today is responsible for whether or not you get a private barrel of Buffalo Trace or blends or Eagle Rare or 1792. Although I think he may not actually handle 1792. That was split with Daniel Donovan, but Daniel Donovan retired. Not important. Point is, this episode is all about Buffalo Trace, all about their products. I feel like I asked quite a bit of questions, and Harlen was an incredible guest, so I really appreciate them coming on today. This week's show, as always, is sponsored by Terlato Distell Artisan Spirits, leader in premium artisan products like Bunnahabhain, Deanston, Ledaig, Tobermory, Bains, Black Bottle, and Scottish Leader. It's also brought to you by Belle Meade. Belle Meade Bourbon, aged to perfection. Belle Meade's high rye bourbon portfolio offers a variety of taste-tempting expressions, including the award-winning sherry, Madeira, Cognac Cask, as well as their classic small batch bourbon and the new Cask Strength Reserve. I'm not great at this, so bear with me. We have a couple more sponsors. Balcones. Balcones, as always, is a big supporter of us. They're a past sponsor, and now they are a current sponsor. Balcones will be sponsoring the show through August. In 2008, Balcones was nothing more than an idea driven by a passion to create something original and authentic. Focusing on ingredients and process, they breathed new life into Texas whiskey, earning them worldwide recognition for their products. And that's absolutely true. If anyone in Texas is killing it on a global scale, it's Balcones. Our last sponsor is Sagamore Rye. Today's production is brought to you by this award-winning Baltimore-based distillery, home to the world's best rye whiskey. I think that covers all of our bases. I hope you got through it. I appreciate you. If not, next time, skip. It's not that hard. It's a podcast. Without further ado, Harlen Wheatley, master distiller for Buffalo Trace Distillery, and Tyler Fraser, the Texas state manager for the brand. Cheers. Thanks so much for being on the show, man.
Glad to be here.
I'm Tyler, longtime pest on your phone. I appreciate you guys being here. For those who don't know, which it'll be in the introduction, but Tyler is the state manager, and I might be butchering your title, so clarify. But state
correct.
manager for Sazerac Brands in the state of Texas, and then Harlen, you worked there too, right? I think bit of a long time employee there. I think
about 25 years.
25 years. What's your title there?
Master Distiller.
Oh, okay. Is that's an important job? I take it.
We think it's fairly important to stay on top of things.
Well, you guys are killing it. I'm glad you're here for a couple of reasons. First, the last time you were in town, and I'll start off right with a big question. I have misquoted you probably a dozen times on this show, and only because I couldn't remember the exact number. But in the last time you were here, you were talking about the expansion of Buffalo Trace and how much distillate you're putting in barrel a day, and the number I remembered was 1,000 barrels a day, and I was hoping you could clarify.
Yeah, that's going to be right. Once we're done with the current work that we're doing this summer, we'll be up to 1,000 barrels a day, and we're running 6 days a week, 1,000 barrels, and then we have to have the 7th day for cleanup, but that's the way we're going to be running for quite some time. We don't see any end in sight.
No, the way things are going, especially with you guys have always been across the board consistent and on the lower end of the price scale, right? Just consistently fantastic and consistently affordable. Oftentimes for years, you guys are introduced as like when people are saying, I'm looking to get into bourbon, what do I try? 5 of the 10 suggestions, 8 of the 10 suggestions are likely a Buffalo Trace product.
We're pretty big believers in charging a fair price. So, we look at bottles of bourbon that are sold, and it just didn't cost that much to make it. So sometimes people kind of get greedy, I think. And, for us, we've always wanted to be fair with our customers, and the main goal there is long-term customers. We want people to be happy with us and stick with us for 30 years, because we have a lot of plans to grow and continue to sell a lot of more bourbon. And so we need these customers with us for the ride.
Well, and that, as far as I know, that's always been the message. You guys are, especially the relationships you have with retailers, has always been very important. The longevity, and that's something you've expressed to me a few times. It's important not just to support your bourbon, but your company, everything you're trying to do, everything you're trying to innovate and change. I mean, the last couple of years, quite some time, you guys have been working on one of my favorites was the Single Oak project, right? Just always trying to refine and tune and see what works. And
yeah, that Single Oak project was basically it's a 20-year project, and we've got several of those projects, but it's part of our experimental program where we look at all aspects of bourbon production, whether it be aging or environment or wood, and we've got a lot of those coming. We've got over 30,000 barrels of experiments in the inventory now and growing, and all those, the fun part about those is we have to release those to the public. We're going to come out with different brands, different expressions of our experimental collection. It's, for us, we're not trying to rest on our laurels because we've got a lot of really good stuff, but we want to always have something in the hopper, for people to be excited about and be looking for. So, and I think we're got a pretty good inventory to show people. So,
yeah, how many labels do you guys have?
Man, label wise, we're in the hundreds of labels, but we've got about 18 different bourbons from Buffalo Trace. We've got, of those, maybe 45 different expressions. So, our philosophy has always been real simple, to keep the quality as high as possible and always thinking about taste. But then the other one is variety. And we know that it's important that, if you have a room of 100 people, 50 people will like rye bourbon, 50 people might like wheat bourbon, they might like single barrel, small batch, rye whiskey, or a vodka. So we try to keep, people in touch with all of our brands,
And what'd you bring with you today?
We brought some of the standbys with Weller being our wheated recipe. It starts off life with this Weller Special Reserve 90 proof, and then it goes all the way up to Pappy Van Winkle 23-year-old. And then
Never heard of it.
Yeah, it's a little small brand. And then we have the rye recipe. This is our standard rye recipe, but for Buffalo Trace, that's our flagship, brand, and that's the one we're really proud of. And we grew it from 0 cases to now it's getting to be worldwide. It's in every state now and continuing to grow. Relatively new to market. I mean, we started in 1999, but we're continuing to grow it, and really proud of that. 8-year-old product. So this recipe services several labels. So we have Benchmark at a younger age, about 3 or 4-year-old, that goes all the way up into Eagle Rare 17-year-old. And now we have a double Eagle Rare 20-year-old. So that recipe services several labels based on age and then taste profile.
Sure.
And then we brought the Wheatley Vodka. We started that about 5 years ago. And the goal for that was to have a craft-style vodka representing the distillery. Everything about this vodka is related to the same passion and processes that we do with our bourbons. We want it to be craft style, made in small batches, and be able to totally control the quality of the vodka. One of the coin phrases that they're using that I've said is, it's the way vodka should taste. Really clean, nice and delicate, goes with anything. Well, good price. It has a little bit of differentiation, so it's 82 proof. It's good for the bartenders. They like it because it stands up in a cocktail. Sure. 10 times distilled, 2 different recipes. We did make it a little bit complicated because that's the way we roll, but it is, we think it's and it's winning awards for taste, which is really important. And what we always say is, with that is to get it in front of people and let them taste it and compare it to the vodkas they normally drink. Sure. Over 30% of people are drinking vodka, so we might as well have something that's really good for them to drink. That's kind of our motto. And, that's what it's all about for us.
10 times distilled, that can't be cost efficient.
It is a little bit. It is our most expensive vodka to produce, but relative terms, it's okay. And the good thing about the vodka, of course, is it doesn't have to be aged.
Sure.
We're used to, producing a whiskey and letting it age for 8 years in a barrel and waiting for that. But with vodka, if the demand grows, we can grow with it.
Sure.
We can make we can make it pretty quick as long as we got the bottles and the caps and the labels and all that. So that's the nice thing about vodka.
Well, a big part of the show is drinking and having a good conversation. Yeah. So I figured let's start with. I actually have not had Weller Special Reserve in probably quite some time. I don't remember the last time I had a pour of one.
Yeah.
You want to start there? Would you want to start with Buffalo Trace?
We can start there. It's fine. It's probably a little bit more, with a wheated bourbon generally. I don't want to put words in people's mouths, but it generally is a little bit more delicate, not as spicy. Maybe some people say sweeter, but it's more mild than a spicy rye bourbon. So it's probably a good place to start.
Sure.
The age on that's similar to a Buffalo Trace. It's about 7 to 8 years old.
And excuse me, it's the wrong pipe. And I know allocation is often, the word allocation is often a bit misused between consumer and industry. It's an industry term, meaning there's just not enough to go around, right? So you gotta sparse it out. All of y'all's products, I think, are current. All your bourbon, at least, are across the board, just in so high demand that I think it's kind of hard to spread it around evenly.
It is. It's every drop we have. And when we walk people around the distillery, we'll show them all of our warehouses and literally millions of barrels that we have in stock. And we always point out the fact that every single drop is sold. And we have to be really careful. We talk to retailers all the time, and they say, they want more bourbon. My best customers are asking for the bourbons, and then we always come back and say, well, our best customers are also asking for the bourbons.
Sure.
So that's how we determine, who can get more bourbon.
Sure.
Is based on if Texas is selling a lot of bourbon, they get more bourbon. That's kind of the way that works.
You actually bring up a good point, and I don't remember if I heard this from someone or if it was something that we kind of assessed, but I'm hoping you can explain. I've always explained it like this, as far as like you see a lot of Blantons in Louisiana, you see a lot of Weller 12 in Texas, and I'm sure it differs depending on the state.
It does.
I've always explained it like if I've got 5 different candy bars and 5 kids, I almost have that many, that you give it's not, instead of trying to split everything, a third of each candy bar with each kid or whatever, you kind of, is that how, I mean, I'm trying to understand, or at least I'm sure people are wondering how Blanton sees, or Louisiana sees a lot of Blanton's picks or a lot of Blanton's compared to, although Texas, I know we get a ton of it, right? But in my mind, I think the perception, at least from the national perspective, is that Weller 12 gets flooded to Texas and Blanton's to Louisiana. Is that just a perception? Is that
no? It's not. It's not a perception. It is based on the market. So, for example, Louisiana probably, if you look back in the history of Blanton's, we've probably shipped a lot of Blantons to Louisiana, and they're a long-time consumer of Blantons. Same way with Weller in Texas. Weller's was at one time the huge brand, for us here in Texas compared to the rest of the country. So, we're always going to support the Weller in Texas.
I see. So it's because of early foundations.
Oh yeah, definitely. We're going back to 40 years.
Generational.
Yeah. And so we look at, the consumption in each city and then what target, what priority brands we have in every city, because every city is different. Every single city is different. And they all have different trends and, drinking habits and whatever. So we try to balance, we have a pie of Buffalo Trace that we have to divide up in the U.S. and a little bit global. We're also trying to dabble in global, but because the reason is we're investing millions and millions of dollars in inventory currently. And for some reason, if sales do ever slow down in the U.S., which we hope they don't,
of course,
but if they do, we have to have a plan B. And we have to start seeding that global market. So we're just getting started with global as well. So, every pallet you ship over there is a pallet we can't ship over here. So because there's just so much bourbon in the warehouse.
You can't really win, can you?
We are
Especially
winning. Yeah, we are winning, and we're happy that we have this problem. It is better than the other way around, and we're very grateful for it. So, and we understand that. And that's one of the reasons why we are the way we are, charging fair prices and not gouging. And we think it's really important to grow it long term and do it the right way. So,
well, you guys are, I would say, arguably it's not a zero sum game. I'm not throwing shade at anyone else, but you guys are the Pappy of distilleries, right? Like you get both literally and figuratively. You guys are sitting atop the Iron Throne, so to speak, as far as the fervor, the rumors, the panic that people have. It can't be easy.
No, it's definitely not easy. And we always say, even for Buffalo Trace, we're busy. We're always busy, and we're always thinking about the future and trying to do the right things, make good decisions for the future. And again, it's not easy because we don't like to think we're on top. We like to think we're still trying to get to the top. And in order to do that, you can't rest. I mean, because as well as I do, there are people right this minute having meetings and saying, what can we do to take share from Buffalo Trace?
Sure.
There's thousands of those probably going on right now. Mm-hmm. So we got to have our own meetings and say, what can we do to keep our share, from, losing that to competitors.
Continuous improvement.
Oh yeah. So
and this year you guys actually announced, I think, some slight price, very reasonable price increases on some of your products. Does that sort of thing make you a bit nervous about losing that share of the pie?
No, the price increases are usually around
They're long overdue,
the market.
By the way.
It's usually it is market driven because, just because the cost of corn went up doesn't necessarily mean you can raise the price of a bottle.
Sure.
Because if the market doesn't allow you to do that, you will definitely lose your share, if nobody else raises their prices. So we're very sensitive to the market price. And then really, to be fair on that, it's really difficult to manage those market prices. Because you're looking at, how that market's doing long term and so on. So I think that's a thing that Tyler and his group does is they look at the market and how those prices, shake out.
It's long overdue, and I think it's both reasonable and have you guys received any blow? I don't think so, right? Or it's just there's just been with a brand like Buffalo Trace, and I said this off air, the panic and the fervor is just so. They want to make sure that they can still find what they've do you know Wade Woodard?
I don't think so.
He's a local guy that's real big on cola, TTB follow-up cola, making sure labels are compliant. But he's been doing this since 2002, and he was actually friends with Randy Blank, who got one of the private barrels of Pappy Van Winkle. We had him on the show. He did a private barrel of Van Winkle Lot B, 12-year-old, back in 2002. And he tells stories about how when he, just 4 years ago, you could find all this stuff on the shelf. And now it's just trying to find this that's not, the green label or not marked up crazy at the store. It's difficult,
It is difficult. We've seen, a lot of places all over the country, taking advantage of it and, overpricing it on the label, on the shelf. And it's not what we recommend.
Sure.
For sure. Because it's, like I said, they're just being greedy with the demand being so high the way it is,
Well, I think the internet has introduced a different dynamic. I know Chuck Cowdery likes to, and for those who don't know, Chuck Cowdery is a longtime whiskey blogger. He writes articles about what's happening in the industry. I don't know if he's technically a historian, but I would definitely give him a little bit of credit there. But he doesn't think that he thinks that the online communities are a bit what's the word I'm looking for? Not the word I'm thinking of sounds like similar to arrogant, but it starts with an H. It's I do this all the time on the show. I blank out. Verbose. It's a bit hubris. Man, I'm so glad I thought of that. They think it's a little hubris that we as consumers think that the internet has more power than it does, but it really does. The secondary market has changed how retailers are treating your bottles. The panic and the fighting, happens on this side, and that money doesn't go to you guys. You guys could, pay what you've always been paid. But
I went to a retailer not too long ago, and I don't know the rules, and I don't even remember what state I was in, but he basically had me sign some Eagle Rare bottles, and he had 60 of them. And he posted a blog online live as he was interviewing me, kind of similar to this, and all 60 bottles sold in less than a minute.
That's awesome.
Online. For a retailer, it's a lot of power.
Sure.
He's not going to sell 60 bottles of Eagle Rare in less than a minute any other way.
Sure.
So it's a really powerful tool, to use.
Do you guys, I know that there's this, and I'm kind of changing gears a little bit here. You guys came out with Craft Your Perfect Bourbon last year. Mm-hmm. Is that coming back for a second round, or was that a one-off? No,
we're going to continue to do that. We're happy with the results, and the good thing about that was the fact that we have the bourbon, to support that a little bit. Again, highly allocated, not a lot of bottles,
sure.
But we can continue to offer that every year.
Are you guys making? I know you're making vodka and bourbon. Are there other spirits? Are you guys making any brandies or rums?
Well,
in those beautiful stills.
So the answer is yes. We're everything's on the table.
Sure.
So we look at all different types of products, and how do we improve them all? So we apply the same philosophy that we do on our bourbons to all the spirits. So we're working with tequila manufacturers and trying to do one-offs like aging tequila in Buffalo Trace barrels and
the Boomerang Program.
Yeah. So that's been really a good program.
Can you explain a little bit what that program is?
We have customers come in and pick barrels, private label barrels, private barrels for themselves, and then when we dump the barrel, then they have the option of also putting tequila in that used barrel in Mexico. So we'll ship it down to Mexico and identify that barrel, and then they will let it age however long they decide, and then we'll bottle it up, and they'll have their own tequila aged in a used barrel that they selected. So
that's awesome.
It's been a good program, and we've got tequila in Weller wheated barrels, tequila in Stag barrels, tequila in Buffalo Trace barrels. So it's been really good, and we think it's really good tequila. But that's just an example. We do the same thing in Canada where we're selecting, one barrel at a time for Caribou Crossing. So it's the world's first single barrel Canadian whiskey.
Sure. I've always liked it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so we're trying to be innovative and at the same time balancing that with the legacy brands, We always know that there's something better out there.
Sure. Right as I'm wrapping this up, I'd like to taste that vodka if you got it open.
Yeah.
And that's a 1 liter too, right?
It is.
So if I recall correctly, the price is around $15.
Yeah, it's going to be affordably priced. It's right in there in that Tito's range.
Sure.
Retail, depending upon where you're at. But it's you hand it over to Harlen. I can.
There you go. Do that. Oh, here.
Yeah.
Sorry. It's not going to be clean if there's whiskey in there,
Exactly.
right?
So you were talking a little bit about the recipe, Harlen, but what's the how is it distilled different than other vodkas?
Like I said, we try to do, be a little different. Not just to be different, but we wanted to create a vodka that truly tastes good and has the nice delicate finish that we're looking for, and it stands up in a cocktail. We don't want to lose it in a cocktail. That's what a lot of vodkas, a lot of cocktails do. So 82 proof was important. The 2 recipes we distill separately. So we'll do a corn recipe and then we do a wheated recipe. And we distill those separately 7 times. And then we put those together and then distill 3 more times together. So that'll for a total of 10 for every batch that we make. And, we just feel like we did a lot of experimenting. It took us about 1.5 years to come up with that, process of making the vodka. But that's where we felt like the best balance and the best, flavors were kept at that level. So
To be as clean as possible.
Clean as possible, yet still, good flavor.
Sure. I don't sip vodkas very often, so it's a
No.
nice change of pace.
And I can tell you, because I'm a bourbon drinker myself, of course, but if you take that vodka and compare it to any other vodka, you take a chilled glass, drink it straight, you can sip on that just like a good bourbon.
Sure.
I mean, it's a good spirit,
I appreciate the little edge of sweetness.
Yeah,
you don't. Some vodkas you taste are very corn heavy.
Yep.
And this doesn't have that at all.
It reminds me of like a wheat sweetness, like a
That's
yeah.
And that's the idea. That's behind, because we use red winter wheat, same wheat we use in our wheated bourbons, and we just know what it does for the spirit. So that's why we selected that. We pretty well versed, easy to get, and that's what we use in there. And then that's what we're after. It gives it that nice little delicate finish at the end.
You've got the actual stills numbered on here, the 2 stills that were used.
Yep.
How many stills do you guys have?
Well, we've got over 25 different stills across the world now, and at Buffalo Trace we have 9 at Buffalo Trace. So,
do you guys take a break at all during the year? I know some distilleries do because of a water source issue, but
now we're lucky enough to be right on the Kentucky River as far as cooling water goes, and it keeps, because of the dam system that the Kentucky River has. We do a pretty good job. Now it does get low from time to time in July and August. We've gotten close before, but to this point we've never had to shut down due to drought. The one thing that we do every summer is we shut it down just to service the boilers, put refractory in, get them inspected and things like that for a couple of weeks. And then we fire right back up. So there's no more downtime for us.
yeah, you can't really afford it.
No, we can't really afford it. And people would really think we're crazy if we were down and people screaming for more bourbon. It doesn't add up. So
is there and I turned my ringer off, but I apparently left my vibrating. What's the word I'm looking for? Not that word. The vibrations on. I was going to ask if you guys store any water year round. I know that Jack Daniel's actually has a couple of tanks that they store, and I think he said something like 10 million gallons, some crazy numbers.
Is that for production or for cooling?
In case something happens with the spring, they have this cave spring that they use,
gotcha.
and I think either 10 million or 20 million. You have to go back. I've slept since then, so I forgot all the information. But they have a specific storage tank that they keep some water just in case there's some sort of issue with their cave spring. And I was curious if there were any other distillers kind of like saving up water just in case.
We do, again, the river for us is our cooling source, so we're lucky enough to not really have to worry about that. But we do have 2 reservoirs that we use for process water, and then we do have springs on site. We're not really using them for production because we go through so much volume.
Sure.
But we do our own purification on site as well. So we bring in city water that's
RO,
and then we use a reverse osmosis to purify it, and we use that for cutting all the whiskeys and things.
Sure.
So we've never had really a water source issue, which is one, some of the competitive advantages that we have.
Sounds like it.
The fact that we have plentiful water. I'm just used to that. So, we've opened a few distilleries over the years, and the first thing you do is, do you have water? Can you get electric? And what do you do with the slop?
Sure.
That's what you do if you want to open a distillery. I'm always amazed at these guys that are open distilleries on the side of a mountain somewhere and there's no water source.
Sure.
Well, you're going to have a problem there.
Yeah, it may look cool, but yeah.
You got to have a water source, and and again, that's just the way I've been trained. So I'm just used to that. But as long as you have water and electric and a place to put your slop, that's really important.
What always been impressive to me since I first went out to Kentucky was just how great the water source is out there. Just like you said, tap water tastes amazing. Right here,
we don't talk about tap water. No, I actually think I read a report because the discussion came up a few years back about I don't know if you guys do this, but a lot of Kentucky distillers love to rant about the Kentucky limestone filtered water, but ignore the fact that most water that's processed is usually city water, reverse osmosis, RO. So the limestone thing is not really a huge factor, but in looking and having that conversation and looking into Kentucky's water, your tap water is some of the best water in the world. Definitely in the U.S. I think you guys are rated. I could be wrong, but I think you guys may have, besides Seattle, I think has really good tap water. You guys have some of the best tap water. The city water is some of the most purest, best tasting water in the country. And
it's really important for us for yeast health in our fermentation, because yeast looks for magnesium, calcium, things that are in limestone water. And that's we don't use reverse osmosis in the fermenters. And all that water comes from the city, but it's not been reverse osmosis. So there's still plenty of good nutrients in there, and no iron, which is a critical element that you don't want iron in the water. Excuse me, because it hurts the whiskey. If you put iron in whiskey and then put it in a barrel, it'll turn black. So these are all, and you're right. It's a bit of luck, but I think it's determined by our ancestors that decided to settle there because of the water,
Sure.
And it's also centrally located. There's a lot of good reasons to be in Kentucky.
You guys have real seasons too.
And we do have seasons, which is
cold as death in January.
Yeah. And it just simply helps our barrel aging. The humidities are right. If it's not too humid, or if it's dry some days, it's just naturally helping the aging of the bourbon. So if you take that bourbon barrel to India, for example, super humid, totally different aging characteristic, it just will not taste the same. Simple as that.
That reminds me, are you guys aging in other states besides Texas? Besides Kentucky?
We, if you count our distillery in France, we have a cognac distillery in France. We have a distillery in India. And then we age barrels in Canada. And if you count the relationship in Mexico, we got some stuff down there aging.
Any in Texas? Because that's the conundrum that everyone in Texas is trying to solve.
Yeah. We don't have anything really in Texas.
It's such everyone's trying to solve that Rubik's Cube of the heat and humidity.
It is a Rubik's Cube.
Heat and
and the humidity down here is pretty brutal.
Yeah, I'm sweating right now.
Yeah.
You've got to balance it out, and it's really important. We're doing a lot of experimentation and projects related to temperature and humidity in the warehouses, because we're building new warehouses. We're building one warehouse every 4 months, and we're filling it up every 4 months. So we're full still. And it's an investment of about $25 million per warehouse because they're so big. And in those warehouses, we're controlling temperature and humidity through a patented heating process. And we're also trying to mimic our warehouses down at the original original part of the distillery, because we know it ages really well there. So we're trying to mimic that through these new warehouses, which we think is happening. And it might even be better because of the conditions. But we're really watching that temperature and humidity closely because it's so important. It's critically important for the aging process. And the reason it affects us the most is because our whiskeys are aged longer than our competitors. Our competitors' average age is probably 3 or 4 years old as on an average. Sure. And our average product, Buffalo Trace, is aged for 7 or 8 years, right? So all of our important aging characteristics are double important, sure. Right? So that's the way we have to look at it. Plus, it takes us twice as much storage space because we age it longer, and that's why we have to continue to grow.
So how many, and I wanted to ask, I wrote this down early in the conversation, how many warehouses do you guys have?
So we're spread out in Kentucky. We have some storage in Owensboro. We have some storage in Bardstown. And then at Buffalo Trace, we have 23 warehouses, and we just finished our 24th warehouse. And all those warehouses, and the thing that really sets ours apart is we heat our warehouses, and then they're multiple stories. So most distilleries you go to, there might only be one floor. They don't heat the warehouse. So in our opinion, in the wintertime, they're not getting that extra bit of aging that we get. So our 4-year-old,
their aging stops at a certain point.
It does as it gets cold.
Is it 20 degrees? There's a certain.
We have a number, but it's kind of a
private thing.
So
there is a publicized number for some distilleries who will say that the aging process halts once it gets below a certain temperature.
It definitely does.
It could be freezing temp 32. It could be 20. It could be 0. I forget. But that's the idea. So you guys,
we know the number.
You guys don't want a downtime. You guys want a little bit of aging going on,
right? So our 4-year-old might taste like a competitor's 5-year-old,
sure, because
we're gaining a couple of months every year through that heating cycle that we have.
Tortoise in the hair.
That's right. So we feel like 10-year-old bourbon for us really tastes a lot of good maturity there. And it's important to be able to do that. So all these new warehouses that we're building, again, we have a patented heating process. It's a radiant heating system with dual zones where we can adjust it as needed, and we can really keep an eye. It's all electronically monitored, and we can keep an eye on it really closely because those are the money makers. Those barrels, we call them our children, right?
That's a lot of children. And how many barrels do you have total? 24 warehouses?
We have millions. That's about all I can tell you. We are private, and we try to keep that tight. But we have millions of barrels, and depending on which brand we're talking about, depends on how many barrels we have.
Sure. I had a question about, because 1792 is you guys as well, right?
Right.
It's or y'all's sister company.
Yes.
And when I was at Jack Daniel's, we went to Tennessee a couple of weeks ago to do an interview with Chris Fletcher. And we asked him, because sometimes, so in my day job, I work in aviation. And when something happens, like when a new aircraft comes out and there's like 2 plane crashes, the whole industry freaks out and thinks we got to halt sales of this particular aircraft, look into what the issue is. I asked Chris if there was any concern with when the warehouse collapsed, is that something that the whole industry decides to look at? Because I believe when the Heaven Hill fire happened, the whole industry was like, we need fire suppression systems, we need this, we need that. Chris said, no, we didn't even think about it. But even this week, I think there was another warehouse collapse for a different company.
In Owensboro, yeah.
Are there discussions over, or at least internally, when the 1792 thing happened, did you guys discuss any extra precautions with new warehouse builds?
I don't, Chris, I don't know why he would have said that, because I think the whole industry did take a hard look at, how all these warehouses are being built and how they were built, and a big review on all of that. And some of the builders of warehouses have been doing surveys, throughout the industry, and really taking a hard look at it because it's so serious.
Sure.
And we're doing that as well. We're looking at every building. We've got buildings built in the 1800s. And so there's a lot of repairs and a lot of things that happen over the years that we have to, review and take a look at, because, it could happen. And that's just so serious, and a lot of lives involved and so on. So,
sure.
But the whole industry's taking a hard look at it. We certainly are, not just with warehousing, but, tanks and, infrastructure in general.
It's something that obviously you don't want it to be a habitual thing with each warehouse holding 40, 30, 40, 50,000 barrels.
Right.
I would imagine it's especially when you're already hard to keep in market, right? It's already hard to keep product on the shelf.
Yeah, there's nothing good about a pile of barrels that you can't use, especially from a safety perspective.
Well, when we were there at 1792, the tour guide mentioned that sometimes Pappy is aged at the 1792 warehouses up top. I would imagine if those warehouses no,
we don't have any Pappy aging in 1792. That's all Buffalo Trace. So, but we did have our bourbon. Some of our bourbon was aging there, for the other brands, younger brands that we use. And we do that in Owensboro as well. We'll ship some barrels down there because we have 8 warehouses down in Owensboro that we're using, for aging our bourbons too. But usually it's like corn whiskey or a 3 or 4 year old bourbon. Some of the younger stuff, but definitely not a Pappy. It wouldn't be there.
Sure. I want to taste that Buffalo Trace now if you're ready.
Yeah, I'll crack it.
I'm a bit harsh on vodkas at times, giving some to me, I want flavor in what I taste. And I know your goal may have been to be clean, but this actually has an actual
delicate
sweetness to it that I really like.
We use the word delicate all the time because it's a 2-part taste. It's, with a vodka, you can tell the difference between this one and another one because this one has that nice delicate second part of the taste.
Some of this here.
Wonder how much I can get for that cup on secondary.
Yeah.
Blend here.
We looked at that as well. When we bottle things in our hand bottling line, there's always stuff left over in the tanks. And we said, we could theoretically, if there was a way to do it, you could collect it. Yeah.
Charity. I mean, you guys are doing that with your 6 millionth barrel, right?
We are.
Has that been decided yet? That whole barrel?
It's supposed to happen in July of this year. So
there's still time to submit.
There's still time to submit. I think they're getting 400. They're going to plan on 400 bottles to go into the charities of the ones that we select, and then after that they should be able to raise a lot of money. Our goal is $500,000 out of one barrel.
So I saw that on the questionnaire. The questionnaire is how much do you think the bottle will sell for the charity? And it's a hard thing to call.
Yeah.
We do a lot with the veterans charity here locally called Camp Hope. And for my whiskey festival, we do a lot with Warriors for Freedom, which is a veterans charity as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought about applying, and then I got to that part in the question, and I was like, I don't know. Like, how do you?
It just depends on who's in the audience, I guess.
Yeah, how do you judge the allure and what it might go for? So, my biggest concern is that I hate to overshoot it and say it may go for 1,000 and it only goes for 200. Is that a concern as well?
It's not really a concern. I mean, if you get anything for it, that's a good thing.
Sure.
But typically, I just did an auction about a month ago. We auctioned off a Pappy 23 for $3,000, and
that sounds all right.
And that's just for me, it's amazing that a bottle of bourbon can raise that much money for charity. But it's just a great thing, and any more of those type of bottles, that's kind of what they're for. I mean, it's doing a lot of good and
a lot of good,
creating a lot of cash for those that need it.
Our first OFC that was released a few years ago was
Lord Jesus,
was for charity, right?
Yeah.
But I can't remember what the average was, but it was
$10,000
over $10,000 a bottle. It was a pretty amazing number.
I think we got charity. Maybe one bottle. The highest one was maybe 30,000 or something like that.
That sounds right.
But it's for the charity.
Sure,
and these guys are getting the bottles as a prize, pretty much.
Sure,
I mean, they're donating to the charity. That's the way you have to think of it. It's not truly about the bottle. It's about the charity.
Yeah, sure.
And they're getting a bottle to take home with them when after the donation. That's the way you need to look at it. But it definitely is doing a lot of good. And like I said, if you can raise $500,000 for charity out of one barrel, it's just a great program, And we're not planning on stopping that either. We're going to have $7 million coming up, pretty soon.
Soon.
And then and it'll get faster as we're producing. I mean, next thing you know, I've made the comment before, we might have to build some more single barrel warehouses because we're eventually going to be doing, every couple of years, we're going to have another millionth barrel. And
is there plans, and there may already be, because I think I remember seeing a photo, but are there plans to build more specific Blantons warehouses?
There's not really plans for that yet because we still have plenty of capacity in our Blanton's warehouse. So we're in pretty good shape. The way that's projected to grow, we should be fine. We do feel like we've got really good warehousing and lots of possibilities because of our variety. Every warehouse we have is different, and because of that, we're able to. We could, if we had to, we could use other warehouses, to produce that product. So we're not too concerned with it. And it's really, for us, it's all about the capacity overall, and that's what we're trying to stay ahead of. We're currently not staying ahead of it. We're just barely making it.
Sure.
We're building these warehouses as fast as we can, safely, but we will get ahead of it because as of now, we've started building 2 at a time. And the idea is to get at least 1 or 2 warehouses ahead, because right now we roll barrels right up until the day they say that warehouse is good to go, we got a barrel rolling in it.
Sure.
We have no spare time at all, which is a good thing.
How often were the tractor trailers going up there?
Every 20 minutes.
Oh, wow.
To fill them? It's crazy.
Every 20 minutes.
Does it take as long to fill as it did to build?
No, it's exactly the same right now. That's what I'm saying. We're keeping up with building.
Right.
So what they're doing now is they're doing two foundation crews that are doing the grading work, and then they're going to build one foundation right after another. And that way we can build 2 at a time and get maybe 1 warehouse ahead.
Sure.
So we're not so pressed. Because right now we're just pressed for space. Every barrel count counts.
Absolutely. And you guys are how quickly are you depleting those warehouses? Like if you say, okay, today we're going to be bottling whatever.
Yeah. Well, we're depleting them. I can tell you that we're outpacing the industry more than double. I can say
in
that.
depletions.
In depletions.
Ooh.
So we're depleting fast.
I think you deserve a raise there, buddy.
Yeah. I mean, it's the overall company, and it's all facets of the company that's on board with that.
That's fantastic.
So we're on the 5th now warehouse on the top of the hill?
The new farm, we built 4 so far. We just finished. It's going to be done in a week. So July 1st.
Is 5?
It'll be number 5.
How fast does it take to build?
About 4 months.
4 months?
And we
fill 2 at a time?
And we're getting ready to do 2 at a time. So the 6th and 7th warehouse will be kind of back to back.
Wow.
So what all's taking place down below at the distillery, right? Because there's a lot going on down there too.
Well, we're only going to spend so I always talk about things that set us apart from other distilleries. So the main thing is the fact that we can sell a $25 bottle of bourbon and still be super high quality.
Sure.
That really sets us apart.
And even though it's not age dated, it's
right.
up there, right? 6 to 8 years, 7, 8 years.
And the other thing we're able to do because of our size, we can invest into the future. So we're spending $100 million just in our distillery this summer. We're completely swapping out our cooker process. So we're going bigger. We'll be able to cook up to 550,000 barrels a year, and then we're also working on plans for the new still house with a new still. It's the biggest still in the industry. It's a 7-foot diameter, 30-foot tall column. No one else has that kind of volume of a still and in the industry. And then,
are you worried about? In my mind, I always wonder, like when you go to Scotland and you visit pot stills, and they talk about how every dent in the copper affects the flavor.
We believe that too.
Sure. My question is, you guys are remarkably consistent flavor-wise. Building these stills and expanding and now growing even to the industry's largest still, you guys ever concerned with flavor changing?
No, because what I described to you there a second ago was our current still is the biggest in the industry.
Oh, I see.
So it's a 7-foot diameter, 30-foot tall still, and we're building a replica of it. So we're just going to have 2 of them.
Sure.
And everything we're doing is replication. So our cooker process that we're changing, we kept the process. So it's vacuum cooled, pressure cookers, same process, just bigger. And so that it's really important. Everything we've done in automation is around saving and securing our current process that we've been doing since Prohibition.
And killing it, right?
And so we're really serious about this. So we know that it makes a difference. That still has the same reflux piping, the same size, same type of materials. Everything's going to be exactly the same. So, because it is critically, that equipment is a lot of the reason our products taste the way they do. It's aging, but that equipment is a big part of the raw ingredient of the bourbon
before it even goes in the barrel.
It's super. If you change the still, it will definitely change your product. We know that for sure. We've done it.
Have there ever been, and I'm sure you may not even answer this, but have there ever been any ideas you've seen in the industry that you guys thought we should do that?
I'm not trying to sound arrogant at all, but one of the things we're really good at is keeping our nose to the grindstone and blinders on and not worrying so much about the industry. And our goal is always to control our own destiny. And there's a lot of work involved to do that. So sometimes you got to get involved with tree harvesters and every facet of the business. So we do look at the industry. I mean, we look at what they're doing, and I'm not going to say we're not getting ideas from other people. I mean, we'll look at it. We look at everything. So everything's on the table, and we try to. But we try to not do. We try to not follow people.
Sure.
So if they're doing something, we're not going to just go out and do it because they are. I don't think you can give an example of us ever doing that. And we do it. We do everything based on what we think is best for us.
Sure. I was talking to someone. I think it was last week. You guys aren't actually. It may have been a little further back. You guys aren't actually on the bourbon trail, right?
We're not, and it's kind of a long story. But we looked at what is the bourbon trail and what does it stand for, and then how much does it cost to be in there?
Oh, it costs to be a part of it. It costs
extremely, and the way they do it is. It's based on the number of barrels you have in inventory, which makes no sense to us.
Sure.
So a guy with 30,000 barrels of inventory compared
getting the same exposure and
and then we're paying six figures plus to be a part of a program that we're not really sure what we're getting out of it, and then we get the same benefits. So it makes no sense at all to us.
Sure. So I didn't even notice because the first distillery I ever visited in Kentucky was you guys. The grounds alone it's like walking back in time. Everything's brick and industrial looking, and what you imagine in old black and white photos. Like you visit 1792, it's the same way. It's an old, almost like an old clothing factory, right? It's got this kind of old school feel to it. And I just when I think of classic Kentucky bourbon, Wild Turkey. Buffalo Trace. I mean, you guys are up there, and I just didn't. It was news to me. I didn't know.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what we've realized is it just didn't matter.
Sure.
And we weren't getting much benefit out of it, and we really watched it closely and in fact, our tourism actually went up after we got out of the program there. So, we just try to beat our own drum and beat our own drum.
Well, I think. I wanted to circle back on the Wheatley. The name. Is that named after somebody?
Yeah, some guy.
Some jerk.
But they, Steve Wyan, he's our vice president of marketing and sales, really sharp guy. He's responsible for a lot of the thought processes that go behind these new labels that we come out with. Called me up one night and said they're talking about naming a new craft style vodka, and we talked about using my last name, and I said the only thing I'm going to say is we got to do it justice. We can't come out with bubblegum vodka, Wheatley, because I've got a very large family, and I believe every one of those people would come out with pitchforks, and so we have to do it justice, and it has to be good quality, and I have to have some respectable, yeah, for sure, because you got your name on it, and it has to taste right, and we're not going to compromise in any way on it. So, and that was the only thing, and we agreed to do it. So,
well, I'm a fan. I'm happy to see it in market. I do a lot with Michelle Solomon still to this day. She's one of the in-market people for you guys. Huge fan of hers. I kind of expected her to be here today. I didn't expect you to be here today.
Surprise.
But any chance I get to see Jude and of course sit down with Harlen, I thought it was a fantastic opportunity. So I do appreciate it. I did bring about two more bottles. I brought a bottle of William LaRue. Well, I don't know if you ever heard of this, but it's a pretty good bottle. It's okay. And then I brought a barrel pick from a friend of mine, Brett Atlas, who's a writer. He is very influential in the online community, and he did a barrel pick through a store called no flippers. Please don't feed the flippers.
Yeah.
So, I know it's a priority for the brand, at least in Texas, that if you are lucky enough to be a private group and to get a pick, then treat it with the reverence and respect it deserves, and not into a profit sharing nonsense. So I figured we could try a pour of that.
Absolutely.
And go from there. Do you guys have in regards to barrel programs, do you guys have a limit, like for Roses does 600 barrels a year? Does Buffalo Trace have a limit?
Well, we have a limit that's based on how many barrels we have in inventory.
Sure.
So every year is a little different. But we'll allocate a certain number of barrels per state, based on, again, sales for the state.
History and stuff.
And they watch it pretty closely. I mean, we have a whole barrel allocation team of people now that look at, the different states and how many barrels they can sell. And we have to watch it pretty close because it's easy, if you're not watching it, for us anyway, it's easy to overdump.
Sure.
So, if you've got, for example, with Buffalo Trace, don't forget, we have to save some of the barrels for 17-year-old Eagle Rare. So if you're not careful and you dump too many barrels, all of a sudden now, 11 years later, you're out of Eagle Rare 17.
Be a low yield that year.
Right.
And we've seen that with BTAC. Every year the numbers are different. Some years it's crazy low. Stag went up crazy high. It's a balance, and you're having to work on that balance 15 years out or something,
Right. And that's the hard part about it is, I always ask people, they always say, we need more Pappy. We want more Pappy 23. And I say, well, let me just answer this question. Were you drinking Pappy 23 years ago? And almost 95% of them say, we didn't even know it existed 23 years ago. And I say, precisely is the reason why we don't have it today.
Sure.
Because there was not, the demand 23 years ago just wasn't there.
Yeah.
And we were lucky enough to continue to progress and make more every year. And we're doing it more, based on the demand for today. So we're taking a gamble for 2042 or whatever. We're taking a gamble of the demand, at that time.
Sure.
I always say to people, will you sign a contract for 23 years from now
Sure.
to buy a bottle? And most of them say, I don't know, Right. So we're taking a pretty big gamble, and we're willing to do that, and we're producing more every year for it. And that goes for all the brands, not just Pappy. So,
sure.
8 years from now and so on. So if you've started drinking Buffalo Trace within the last 5 or 6 years, that's new to market for us. And that changes the demand, for the futures. That creates creates the shortage. Yeah.
The demand for, I think, Buffalo Trace, there's a couple stores in town that do them. I was lucky enough, a shout out to M&R Liquor at Vintage Park, on the north side of town. Mm-hmm. We tasted through and did a fantastic. I think this particular expression, the was it 94, 90, 90 proof. I always get tons of tobacco notes, and I'm a cigar smoker, so we did a barrel pick with you guys. Well, I say we, it's his barrel pick, but he let me taste it. I would love to see. I know it's hard, and I'm sure you hear this all the time. I'd love to see a ton more of these to market. Knob Creek, I think they did like 1,200 picks last year. And we did a couple that were almost 15 years old. So the projections 15 years ago, so they had a lot stockpiled. But it's fantastic. It's fantastic bourbon. It's something that you guys should be proud of.
Well, we look at the numbers for the barrel pick program, and we just went through it just last week because we're actually planning on, how do you store the barrels, how you process the barrels and so on, because it's growing, again, double-digit growth on that program, and, we have to prepare for that. And we're doing thousands of barrels. It's just not all in Texas, it's
sure.
all over.
It's all over. Got to keep them happy. Are you, and feel free to say you can't talk about it, but the one question we get all the time in our group from new Blantons lovers is, why can't I get the other Blantons, the green, the black, the straight from the barrel? Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
So the real short history is 1984 was first to market We were the first to come out with single barrel bourbon. No one wanted to buy it. It was $25 a bottle. Everybody thought it'd be a flop.
Yeah.
We actually, Elmer told the story. He would go out to the other distilleries and he would say, you guys need to sell some single barrel bourbon. This is a good way to select specific barrels and you can get a specific taste profile and so on. And all of them said that'll never work. That this will never work. So it took a couple of years for it to even catch on enough to sell some.
Sure.
So some of the first people to come to us was the Japanese market, and they said, we would love for you to do it, but we want it to be a little higher proof. We want it to be 8-year-old instead of 6-year-old. They put all these stipulations on it, and we said, what the heck? Let's do it, because we weren't selling the product. And so we did it, and that's really the only reason we started doing it was because the demand at that time was so small that we needed the business, to be honest with you.
Sure.
And now the only reason we do it is because that's just what we've always done it. We've always shipped the, international market, those brands. Now, if we changed now, if we took a case out of that and replaced it here in the U.S., we would just be robbing Peter to pay Paul, because then we wouldn't have a case of the regular Blanton because all of it's sold. We just don't have the stock. So if we did that, we would just be doing it for really no reason.
Sure.
All of it's sold.
So in the future, based off projections and putting 1,000 barrels a day into storage, is it talked about that it may eventually come to the point that we have enough that we can do multiple different expressions of?
I always say never say never.
Sure.
Because we look at everything, like I said, and someday in the future, who knows? We do talk about it because we hear the same questions all the time. But again, right now there's just simply no motivation because we're selling every case we can now. And I think people would be upset because then the regular Blantons would be less of it.
First of all, anything you do,
you can't go wrong.
You're going to be upset.
Right? You can't win.
You can't win. You can't win for losing. My mom would always say that you can't win for losing.
Right. And we do know this. We've learned that we will never be right. No matter what we do, we think, this year we should make, say, 40,000 barrels of Blantons or whatever the number is. We know that won't be right. It'll either be too many or too little. It's not going to be perfect, and we can't win. You're right. We can't win either way. I mean, if you take Blantons away to make that, it's kind of like we've had the question, do you ship a lot of international for Pappy Van Winkle? Well, we did at first, to try to get the name out there. But then we had to cut that back because the demand's so strong here in the U.S., And so we're just robbing people. If you ship more overseas, it means less here in the U.S.
Yeah, you're just pissing off your audience.
Because we only have a set amount of volume. It's kind of hard to get your head around sometimes that we just can't snap our fingers and have more barrels,
So you could, if you wanted to, sell all the Blantons or all the different types of Blantons here in the U.S. It's just
you just have to get the labels approved and do it.
Sure, sure. Yeah. The understanding for the audiences for quite some time was that Ancient Age only allows you guys to sell the standard Blantons here, and that you can't sell the other ones here. And I think that's been the rumors and everything.
Yeah,
else
all of that would have to be agreed upon because that is their label.
Sure.
That's their label that we would have to agree to do. But again, right now there's no motivation on either side to do that.
Sure. So. This has been fantastic. I think highly educational. You answered about 15,000 questions, and I appreciate it.
Good.
I know the group will be highly interested. Tyler, it's good to sit down with you and have a drink.
Sure, yeah.
I always feel like I gotta call Tyler. I hope he picks up the phone. Your jobs are impossibly hard. Your jobs. I'm especially the last few years. I'm very familiar with the aspect of can't seem to make everyone happy, no matter how hard you try. So I have immense respect for you, and you're an absolute legend. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for the time.
Thanks, Chris.
Always a pleasure.